Bloomberg News reporting right now the president is close to making this decision, is leaning toward leaving the Paris Agreement. What would be the consequences of doing that?
Diplomatically and globally, it's a tremendous deal. The Paris Accord is the most significant environmental agreement in world history. The U.S. is a very central player. We're the wealthiest nation. We're the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And if we walked away, it would be a huge symbolic blow to that effort.
Marty, last week the president tweeted he'd make a decision this week. He tweeted that while he was in Europe. What's he considering? What's the conversation like in the White House now about whether to stay or go?
Well, I think it's ultimately a political decision versus an emotional one. His daughter is being very emphatic that we should stay in the Accord, but people like Steve Bannon think staying in the Paris Accord would be a betrayal of his base. So it's politics versus emotion. As I mentioned,
he promised to do this on the campaign trail. So how much of a surprise would it be if he, in fact, were to do it?
Well, I mean, I think it would be a mild surprise, but there have been plenty of reporting in the past months about how he is learning about climate and how he listened to European leaders. And look, there's a lot of things he said on the campaign trail, like moving the capital from to Jerusalem, that is still pending, about staying out of Afghanistan, still pending. So I don't think it would be a tremendous leap to think that he might actually wind up staying in the Accord.
Joe, so much of this hinges on semantics. I hate to take us down that road, but withdrawal means one thing. Withdrawal can mean another thing. What could the U.S. do at this point in terms of exiting the deal?
There are really two or three main strategies that we could take. We could quit the Paris Accord itself, which isn't as easy as it may sound. On one hand, it's an executive decision, and Trump can make it unilaterally, but it would take 3.5 years for that to take effect under the terms of the deal. He could do it faster if he opted to quit the underlying treaty that underpins it. Underpins the Paris Accord, and he could walk away from that within a year. That would be a much bigger deal because that would really symbolize that the U.S. does not want a seat at all at the table when it comes to talking about climate with the global community.
Joe, remind us of the role that businesses played in this leading up to the signing of this deal. Businesses were very involved. They traveled to Paris a few weeks ahead of the inking of it. We heard from the CEO of Exxon today that if the U.S. were to pull out, Exxon would stick with the guidelines that it had put in place as a result of the agreement. What kind of vacuum does it leave for businesses going forward? What role could they play if the U.S. as a whole were to pull out?
Well, corporate demand plays a really big role in clean energy in general. We've got companies like Amazon and Facebook and InBev that have pledged to source all of their power from renewable energy. And many of those companies have been saying, as it's become clear that Trump may pull out, that they would continue to forge ahead with those plans. And so I would expect that corporate demand still will play a significant role in moving away from fossil fuels and towards renewables.
Marty, put this into some recent historical context for us. This was a huge part of President Obama's legacy, something he worked very hard for. It would be a blow to that if the U.S. were to withdraw.
Yes, it would, but I think it's also important to remember that a lot of entities outside of the U.S. government are committed to climate change. Cities, states, consumers have become very conscious about energy use. And so while there's no question this would be a huge symbolic move, the practical implications of such a thing may actually be limited because people are just going to continue to worry about climate and do things to keep things from getting worse.
Do you look at this in concert with what happened last week, the president's first official trip abroad? It was something that he talked about on the sidelines of the G7, for instance, with the new president of France. Is there a continuum between these two things leading to this decision?
Well, he is, I think Donald Trump is obviously trying to stay true to his campaign pledges, and I think people like Steve Bannon are constantly reminding him that his base expects disruption. And his whole stance on NATO, his scolding on the funding issue of NATO, and now Paris would fit into that narrative of staying true to his base. So he's being tugged, and the question is, where will he come out?
Joe Ryan, it was a huge deal when China agreed to participate in this deal. What would this say about China's role in preventing or forestalling climate change if it were to be the country that goes ahead with it and the U.S. is not?
Well, it really gives leadership to China when it comes to developing clean energy technologies and being, leading the rest of the nation when it comes to this fight. And I think that the U.S. risks losing something there.
Marty, I'll ask you lastly here. You're overseeing a lot of the reporters in the D.C. Bureau working on this. The President has an agenda item today, a meeting with his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, formerly of Exxon, somebody who has been an advocate of staying a part of this particular deal. Should we read anything into that? What do you think is happening here in these final hours?
It was on a schedule before, so I don't know that you have to read anything into it, but I'm sure Rex Tillerson has seen all this coverage this morning, and if he has an opportunity to be the last voice to speak to Donald Trump on making a decision, there is this notion that Donald Trump listens to the last person he talks to. So actually, when he finally makes the announcement, it'll be interesting to see who he meets with that day.
What does this tell us about the EPA secretary that we have in place now?
Well, I think that he is trying to advance his agenda. It was interesting that the leaks that came out this morning seem to have emanated from that shop. So he is a forceful advocate for getting out of Paris, and he is someone Donald Trump picked. So